This is, hands down, one of my least favorite days of the year. Why? I don't get much sleep. It all goes back to 1963. It's actually about 6 months before I was born, but that doesn't mean that it didn't affect me. You see, the Navy lied to me. Not in the sense of my shipmates or my instructors. It was an institutional lie. It was a lie that was agreed to and spread, and it became the official position of the United States Navy. The problem is that not all lies are intentional, although this one was. Not all lies are malicious, and this one certainly was not. Some are just necessity. Sometimes a lie is told to make us feel better. Sometimes we're told things that are completely untrue because they just don't want you to worry about it. And in the silent service, the submarine fleet, that means that sometimes things get smudged. In January of 1982, I was in New London, Connecticut for submarine school. And there, I began the process of becoming a United States Navy submarine sailor. The school was interesting. It was fun. I personally didn't find it all that challenging, but I didn't really know a lot about myself at that point. I was literally right out of high school. Graduated high school, went to boot camp, went to sub school. So here I am. And as I recall, there was a day. I do not know if it was on the schedule for this. I don't know if it was just a random BS session. I don't know. But there was a day that we spent most of the entire day talking about the loss of Thresher and the loss of Scorpion. The intention was to impress upon us how dangerous what we were getting into really is. They played us cassette tapes of sounds. The one that I specifically remember was a tape that they told me was the sound of the torpedo hitting Scorpion. Now, I don't believe that's what happened, but how would I know? I was 18 years old, had no experience in any of this stuff, and what they were trying to impress upon me was how seriously dangerous this thing was. And I needed to be a part of that. They told us of the loss of Thresher, and of course, I'd read about it in newspapers and history classes and the likes of that. And they reminded us that what caused the loss of the Thresher was a failure of a silver brazed pipe, seawater pipe, in the engine room, which had caused flooding, unisolatable flooding, which led to an electrical, loss of electrical power. The reactor scrammed, they lost propulsion, and down they went. And boom, the hull collapsed. They all died instantaneously. In fact, they died so quickly that they didn't even know that they had died. That's the hull collapses faster than the human brain can comprehend. That's what we were told. And this has been the official Navy position for the better part of the last 70 years. 60 years. 70 years? I don't know. Since 63. So you learn to live with that, and you learn that these casualties are very dangerous. And so you learn to deal with those, and you learn to focus on damage control procedures and how to fight flooding and fires and all sorts of things. When I reported to USS Michigan and began my actual qualification process, part of that process, of course, was damage control. And I began to study damage control. I was reading through piping tabs, which are big green books that describe all the systems on the submarines. Now, it will not surprise you to learn that most submarine design really hasn't changed that much in the last 100 years. Systems work because we know how to make them work. Yes, technology improves them, but the basic systems are still the basic systems, even today. As a part of that qual process, I was reading in the damage control manual, and there's a whole section in there about Thresher. And there's a whole section in there about why Thresher was doing this deep dive test coming out of the yards. Why was she in the yards? Well, Thresher was a pretty brand new boat. She'd been commissioned in 61. And as part of that process, they didn't know what they had. I mean, she was the first of those high-speed, well, you had the skipjacks, but the skipjacks didn't have the sonar array that the Threshers had. And so the Navy really, this was a brand new thing. And they were learning how to use it, and they were learning how to do these things. And, of course, they put it through the ringer. And one of the things they did was shock testing. This is not unusual for ships to go through shock testing. What happens is they put the ship out there, drop a few depth charges over there, just to see what happens when it shakes. Make sure everything's, ship shape. When it came to Thresher, though, the Navy, really went overboard. And in some of the documentation, it describes the Thresher's shock testing as some of the most severe that had ever been done by the United States Navy. And by the time she gets into Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, she is just broken. I mean, she's a mess. She has problems. And of course, this leads to the Silver Braze joint failing, which leads to her loss. Makes sense, right? The media, of course, has carried this, story for a long time, and that's been it. Until a few years ago when the families of the Thresher sued because they wanted, what does the Navy actually know? I mean, it's been 50 years, come on, 60 years, whatever. And after a court case went all the way to the higher courts, the courts ordered the Navy to release all the Thresher's documentation, which is fine. They did it in what are known as trenchants. They just dump documents. This is typical of a bureaucracy. If they can't baffle you with bullshit, they smother you like a mushroom with so much information that you may never find what you need. And of course, that's what they did. They put out so much information that it was virtually impossible to look through. I have all of the stuff downloaded, but I've never read it because I just don't have that much copious free time. But other people did. It turned out, of course, that there were a lot of questions. There was one particular report, the USS Seawolf, another United States Navy submarine, had been part of the search for Thresher and was purported to have located the Thresher. Now, the story involves some pretty bizarre things, but according to Seawolf's log, 2 days after the Thresher was lost, they were hearing pinging from the main sonar. They were hearing pings from the underwater telephone, and they were hearing hull bangs from what they presumed were people inside the hull, which, again, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the hull had been crushed, but these are elements there. Now, for whatever it's worth, the Seawolf was logging what was going on at the moment. It's not an analytical log. It's not looking back at stuff and going, okay, well, let's look at this and compare it to it's just a moment by moment here's what's going on. If you read it that way, it's appalling, it's shocking. It's the Navy knew people were alive 2 days after the accident. I don't personally believe that. I personally think that what the Seawolf heard was electrical discharges of the sonar or WQC. The banging that they're hearing is stuff that's still collapsing 2 days later, metal parts moving around, that kind of stuff. I don't believe that anybody was alive. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that story is out there. And of course, this causes more concern because now, did the Navy lie about everybody dying instantaneously? The problem with all of this, of course, is that in 1963, the Navy actually knew what happened. Not specifically. I mean, they weren't inside the Thresher, as they say, but they knew what happened. They had direct evidence of the fact that Thresher had a major electrical failure. The non-vital bus had gone snaky at 9:09 a.m. It apparently had some kind of ground and it started cycling through things. And this isn't an electrical class, and I'm not trying to baffle you with all this stuff here, but the bottom line is the non-vital bus went berserk, and it couldn't operate. And so 2 minutes later, it shut down. And that shifted all the power to the vital bus, which just overloaded that, which is why the main coolant pumps on the reactor shut down and they lost propulsion. It's the way it's designed to work. Is it a design flaw? I don't know. You're talking to a guy that was on a submarine that had a design flaw that nobody knew about, that nobody ever thought about. So is it a flaw, or was it just a weakness? That's a question I can't answer. The only person who could answer that would be Admiral Rickover, and of course he's gone. Why they did it that way, I don't know. More importantly, they had specific procedures, because remember, reactor science back then is still very young. They had specific procedures that prevented a fast restart of a reactor. You couldn't just say, oh, screw it, and drop the rods and go. That was against the rules. Now, you might think in an emergency situation, somebody probably suggested that. I assume they did. But procedures are drilled into us for a reason. The Navy knew all of this in 1963. They knew that there was, in fact, no flooding, that it didn't happen that way. They knew that. They knew that what happened was that the Thresher lost propulsion, couldn't move, and because she was negatively buoyant, she literally just slowly sank until she hit crush depth, at which point, poof, she imploded. In 1963, when the newspapers were carrying stories about the flooding, in 1982, when I was being taught that story in sub school, the Navy knew that that was not true. How did they know that it wasn't true? There was a thing in the day called SOSUS, S-O-S-U-S, Sonar Surveillance Underwater System. Without getting into too much detail, even though it's unclassified now and it's well known, SOSUS is an array of hydrophones on the sea floor that were used to track Soviet submarines coming out of Russia and all of the other places as well. And the SOSUS arrays had clearly picked up Thresher. It's what they were designed to do. And clearly showed the electrical problems that Thresher was having. Clearly showed the non-vital bus going bzzz and then grounding out. Clearly showed the MCPs, or the coolant pump shutting down. Clearly showed the ship drifting down, and clearly showed the implosion. In 1963 and 1964, the Navy knew this. And yet, that information was ruthlessly suppressed. Why? At the time, 1963, what is going on in the world? At that time, the SOSUS array was highly classified, beyond classified. It was, you were into the top secret ESI, extra sensitive information, need to know kind of thing. And to reveal that we knew what had happened, to reveal that we knew that the non-vital bus on Thresher had failed, would have said some things, wouldn't it? It would have told the Soviets, look, their sonar arrays are so good that they're picking up ships' non-vital electric buses. If they can do that on their own ships, what are they getting on ours? And it would have revealed that to the Soviets. And so the Navy, perhaps wisely to protect national security, invented a plausible story, which was that it had to be flooding. It had to be caused by silver braze joints because we were seeing so many silver braze joints fail in the yards. And even though we, corporately, knew that that wasn't true, wasn't the most likely cause of her loss, we had to go along with that because otherwise to tell the truth would have meant telling the Soviets what we were capable of. We didn't want that. But even that's not the real lie. The lie that we were given in sub school that, oh, it was quick, it was painless, they never felt it. The Thresher died so suddenly that no one knew about it. The truth is a lot harder, and it's the truth that keeps me awake at night these days. These mid-April days, just, they're hard. They knew they were going down. Do you understand this? This is right out of that film, Ice Station Zebra, where the ship is going down, and the helmsman he's praying. Father, forgive us, blah, blah, blah. And the commander, Rock Hudson, puts his hand on the kid's shoulder, and he says, and the kid is like 18, he puts his hand on his shoulder and says, do you mind, son? We're trying to think. And I can't even watch that scene anymore, because to me, that is what was going on inside a Thresher. People were trying to think, what can we do? How do we get propulsion back? The procedures don't allow it. What do we do? Well, can we fast start the reactor? The procedures say we can't. Well, if we don't, we're going to die anyway. It wasn't slow. It wasn't quick. They knew they were going down slowly, inevitably, and they had been prevented by training and procedures to think outside the box. They went down slowly until the very end, when the ship collapsed, imploded, and we're told was happening so fast that human mind can't even sense it. But who knows if even that's true? If there is any truth in the Seawolf's report 2 days later, maybe someone did survive it. I don't believe that. I can't believe that. But if it is true, that's just more nightmares. It's hard. The ship's crest for Thresher bears this Latin phrase, Vis Tacitas. It translates as silent force. The silence of the Thresher reminds us that some things are worth protecting, even if it means we accept a lie to comfort family, friends, and even future sailors sitting in a New London classroom 20 years later. Because the real lesson of all this wasn't procedural, it wasn't safety, it wasn't even tactical. It was that we accepted the risks because our country asked us to do a dangerous, sometimes deadly job. And that job protected the peace. Still does today. Vis Tacitas also means unspoken power. And that, my friends, is the story of USS Thresher.
Check out more stories from history at davedoeshistory.org.